Welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game. With every conversation, we hope to inspire as many as possible to keep on Dungeon Mastering.
And I'm one of your hosts, DM Neal, aka Jote Moniac, and today we will be talking with Clara Daly and Hannah Rose about designing as a Dungeon Master. It's a great conversation where we look at what they're doing at the high-end production level. Honestly, if you haven't looked at the magazine that they're making, Horizons, you are doing yourself a disservice. But we take the knowledge base that they have from working with amazing people in the industry to learn more about how we can make stuff at our table.
And I'm one of your other hosts, DM Derrick, aka How Not to DM. Neal, would you like to hear one of our beautiful listeners' reviews they have just left us on iTunes?
Yes, I would love to hear it.
From Zalwin, 5 stars. I have listened to every episode. There is truly a plethora of information found within these tomes of knowledge. You will find tips, ideas, and friends sharing ideas and conversations about a hobby they love and share. Even if you're not a DM or GM, you'll find friendly advice here. Wow, thank you so much for that review. We appreciate it.
You heard that right, everyone. It doesn't matter which side of the screen you're on. Come on down. I mean, listen, evil players, this is the podcast for you. If you want to turn the tables on your Dungeon Master, we have hundreds of episodes so that you can learn exactly how to do it.
You're not wrong. The only other thing I have to talk about, Neal, before we jump into the meat is our good friend Kate Corsack. You will remember we talked with her about maps at the end of last year, middle to end of last year, sometime in the fall and winter. Kate talked then about how she had her new book coming out, which she was very excited about. So I want to direct all of you to Kickstarter.com, where you can find Kate's Kickstarter project she's got going for book 1 of her Guardian series. The project is already funded, which is super exciting. She's already raised a bunch of money to make this book possible. So if you are interested in fantasy, you want to get some ideas for your home game, you want to help support some of our awesome guests, this is a great spot to do it. So head on to Kickstarter.com and search for Guardian, or search for Kate Corsack. That's Kate space Korsak. Thanks so much also, Kate, for coming on to the show. Back in the day, we had so much fun, and we're really excited to read your book when it comes out.
Anything you can do to support an independent author, which Kate is, if you've listened to the episode, she went through her own woes to learn that maybe a little independence can go a long way.
Well, Neal, now that we've got all of those awesome announcements out of the way, let's head to the meat.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meats?
The black meat's back on the menu, boys!
Hannah and Clara, thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited to chat about all things Wild Mage, and then also all things DMing and how, all this can apply. So we would love if you could both just tell us a little bit about yourselves, some of your history with tabletop role-playing games and Wild Mage specifically.
Yeah, I'll go first. I'm Hannah Rose. I am a game designer, editor, now art director, and dabbling in layout. Of course, always learning new things, which was part of the reason that Clara and I decided to found this company, Wild Mage Press, together.
And I'm Clara Daly. I am by day a digital director, and outside of that, I am an illustrator and graphic designer, and I've been playing 5e for quite a while and have a deep interest in it, and fortunately found my way into doing work for tabletop and founding Wild Mage Press with Hannah.
Yeah, 2 names that absolutely, if you put into Google or you just start searching your shelf, I pointed at a shelf. I don't know who that's for. It's not even for you guys on the call because I have a background. But if we were to go to my shelf behind me and start picking up some books, some of my favorite books, these are 2 names that you will absolutely find. And because of that, my question that will always get the caveat, is there anything that you're currently working on that you can tell us about?
Well, we are absolutely working on upcoming issues of Horizons, which is our digital first magazine for tabletop RPGs. So we have 3 articles a quarter for 5th edition D&D, and then a rotating featured system. and a nerdy op-ed. So yeah, we have we've had 2 issues that are out now, and issue 3 is coming in April. And we've got stuff being lined up and designed for many future issues. Outside of that, we're exploring some other larger projects, but nothing that we can talk about yet.
Yeah, that falls in the second category.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of my favorite surprise questions that we have, and we always come back to it because I think it's like really like focuses in on kind of who you are, both as a player and a person, is if you had one spell that you could actually cast in your real life, what would it be?
I have answered this a couple different ways over time, and I second guess it every time.
Mm-hmm. That's why I like re-asking it, because I feel like I'm just as confused as I was the first time I was asked that question.
I feel like there's almost a moral imperative to answer cure wounds or spare the dying. I mean, or even wish, though then you start edging into playing God territory. But yeah, I feel like there's a moral imperative to think about what if we could use healing magic, which is just such a generic form of healing so many ills, with very little medical knowledge required. So that's my usual answer.
I'm gonna go slightly off my usual answer, but it's still pretty common. I'm going true polymorph because that's just fun. That's just fun. You can do so much.
If I could pick any class to be, I would be a druid.
There you go.
That would be cool. I feel like, Neal, are you going with the classic, or are you going to switch it up?
My classic is always, and I got this from my father, who was not the nerdiest of guys. He was a very car guy. But if you were ever asked like what superpower, like the fact that he had ever thought of this idea and was like always locked in, the idea that like any superpower he felt he could have, he would always want to be to speak every language. He said that the benefit that you would gain from that is also not, it's also not this thing where you become this thing that everyone potentially seeks out or tries to like leverage or
exploit,
fight for or exploit. It's just kind of that thing of you're just a living Rosetta Stone at all times. And so comprehend languages is my go-to answer.
That's a really cool answer.
Find it really fascinating because as long as like a place has a written language too, and I could hold it, I could then communicate with it, even if it were to just be writing. So like it is my answer, is comprehend languages.
That's so cool.
In the past, I've gone very altruistic, and I'm going to go totally opposite today, and I'm going to say control weather for very selfish reasons, and just always be able to have whatever weather I want. So there we go. I could, in my off season, go and maybe like make it snow a little bit more in places that need it, or rain. That could be nice. But then also I could, have nice weather wherever I went, which could be kind of cool. So it's a little bit of both worlds.
I always wonder if control weather has like fantasy in-world implications of if you are moving the weather pattern, what's happening on the other side of the mountain range?
Then that's my same issue with like not wanting to actually choose summon spells, because I'm like, I don't know what the answer is. Where are they coming from? Do they go back? Are they just going back after they're dead? I can't do it. I can't be that guy.
Too many existential crises to deal with. I get it.
No, I'm out.
All right. So let's dive in now to the topic at hand. So we would love to chat a little bit about Wild Mage Press, what you've been doing, kind of how it came about, and then we'll delve more into kind of the lessons that you've learned in your history in the publication business and how it applies to running games. So yeah, let's start with that. Tell us a little bit about Wild Mage Press and how it came to be.
Clara, do you want to give the 101 here?
I'm very happy to do so. So Hannah was the art director and editor for Tal'Dorei Reborn and happened to need a bit of art. Initially some spots, some items, and it kind of grew from there. And we worked together. We worked really well together, formed a friendship, formed a really good collaboration. And that expanded into when she was working with MCDM, hired me to do some work. And beyond that, it was definitely a friendship. We would, in our off time, talk about things like, what about this cursed item? What about, how could we push the rules of things, and just coming up with silly stuff that was never going to get published, but realizing we had this great collaboration, this shared interest, and it was beyond just tabletop, but really grew into being friends. And from there, she broached at some point, like, hey, I'm looking at creating this pub. Do you, with your skills that really complement mine, want to join and build this up? And here we are.
You can't buy that. It's the person you finding the person that is excited about all of your ideas, but also willing to say that they're not, like, yes, but no, like, and here's the reason why. It's this thing that, like, I could work any job. I have realized that I can figure it out. It's not, but finding good people, and like, and I think, and what echoes out of that is how good the product is. So absolutely. I'm glad you found each other. And we get to reap, and so many different people get to reap the benefits of that.
Yeah. For my part, I knew I wanted to do something like this. And after having been in the industry for many years as a designer and an editor, and moving up to leading projects like Tal'Dorei Reborn and being the managing editor of Arcadia, I was ready to continue in that leadership role and, be able to pick who I want to collaborate with and hire artists and work with all of these amazing, talented people. And I knew that I didn't want to just do something on Patreon on my own. That's really cool. Lots of people have amazing content on Patreon, but I would be really lonely doing that. And I wanted somebody who was a co-founder, who could be a leader, who had the experience and leadership skills and attention to detail and desire to create something really high quality. And so, yeah, I am really lucky to have found all of that in Clara.
Yes, there's so many questions I have and so many answers I have at the same time. It's difficult to like hone in. And I know, and I'm also trying to like parse out, like, what have we already talked about and what did I listen to? But one of the things that I was impressed by listening to some of the interviews that you have already done is that it's not that you necessarily approached it with kind of what I feel like sometimes happens in the TTRPG space, is just kind of this blind success of like finding something, it working well. And sometimes it's difficult, the success you find, because you weren't like potentially prepared for it. That is not how I feel, because I have heard the work that you did prior to starting this, and the 2 business degrees that I have were just like, oh, good job. And then it was like, oh, that too? Oh, wow. So yeah, doing the due diligence beforehand was something that I was really impressed by. And part of me is wanting to know, like, what was it the previous work that you had both done to like recognize that these are some of the things to set yourselves up for success? Is just kind of asking, is like that where it came from?
There's definitely stuff that we have similarly observed in the industry, where I see a lot of times companies and organizations here are like, we're creating stuff for games. We're creating stuff for fun. This is fun. And fun. We don't want any of that stuffy business things. We don't want to use project management tools and calendars and like, track our career goals. And, and we just want somebody who can do social media and graphics and marketing and run a Kickstarter and do the work of 5 different people and pay them $12 an hour. Anyway, so there's a lot of people who are really excited about creating things, and I think don't want to think about the business side of things because it is scary and unknown, because it feels too corporate, because this is such a tiny, tiny industry compared to pretty much anything else. So we have both observed that and knew that, we've both had, I used to be in tech. Clara, as she mentioned, has a career as a digital director and has also been in publishing. And we knew that we wanted to leverage knowledge from outside the industry to, make those deliberate choices.
And I think from my side, especially when I was introduced to Arcadia, one of the things that really resonated with me, both as a GM and as, someone publishing and art and all of that, was the play testing. Like, that wasn't just someone coming up with homebrew and putting it up without it being edited or put through its, steps or anything like that. Like, Arcadia was going through those steps to really make sure that players were getting feedback and that was going through editing and all of that. And that resonated with me heavily before I really understood, like, I, at the time, before really being immersed in this, was just a GM, like buying stuff off DM's Guild and wherever. Like, I didn't necessarily understand what was good, what was bad, why I felt it was good, why I was feeling it was lacking. That play testing meant so much. And it's kind of much like in IT, that invisible back end where you're doing your due diligence. And if you're doing it right, the end product is seamless. And the user doesn't have to know why, but you've put in the work. And I think Hannah really came to all of this with that ethos and understanding and that backlog of, like, listen, to do this right and to separate ourselves from just, I had an idea, like me with my silly hats that are cursed, like, cool, but we're not just putting that out there. Like, there are steps that we need to go through to make sure this is play tested for the end user. And so the GM is proud and able to put this on their table, and it's balanced.
It's like you've done this before, because that's going to lead us directly into the topic that we're looking to do. I like to call it the button theory. Most people know, like, I need a button and I need it to do this. Very few people understand the work it takes to make the button work. They also don't necessarily need to know it for them to make the button function. I can get in a car and I can push the little button that starts it. And because of the way I grew up and the things that I've known, I can tell you kind of everything that happens after that and all that leads to it. Most people just go the button and it's car on and I drive, and that's all they needed. And so providing that button, and I think that's leading us into the conversation about, like, all of the things that happen behind it, so that when you do present something that is homebrew to your campaign, to your world, to your table, to your players, or they've brought something to you, and just using the same analogy of the cursed hats, like having the knowledge to be able to make that effective so that they're not disappointed either by it being too little. And the flip side, you're not necessarily disappointed as the DM because it's just way too powerful. And you think to yourself, why did I ever allow these cursed hats into my game?
I am now cursed by my own cursed, hoisted by my own cursed hat. And, to use your button analogy from the button designer's perspective, right? We're thinking about, where should that button be placed? What is the icon on it so that people have an idea of what it does? If there are similar buttons that do similar things, or the same button on a different mechanism or a different web page, that should have the same design. I'm really passionate about providing the GM with the information they need to make their experience GMing as smooth and panic-free as possible, right? There are always things that the GM is going to have to improvise. The whole point of us handing something to the GM as inspiration and as rules isn't to allow for every scenario. The GM's job is to improvise and fill in those gaps. But when I'm editing an adventure or, dev editing a first draft we get, I'm always thinking about, okay, if I'm the GM using this, where might I get stuck? What kind of questions might the players ask that I feel like the material should answer for me? And if the material is answering that, where's the best place for us to put that answer so the GM can easily see it when they need it?
And also additionally to that, like, where are we intentionally leading the option to improvise? Like, this isn't just a set and go and you don't have any choices but to run as written. we're giving this material so you have a starting point and good parameters, but you as an experienced GM can run with it, change it, adapt it. Like we're not so rigid that we don't expect and want to encourage GMs to be able to change this as fitting to their scenario or their situation.
It makes a lot of sense. It's good to make sure there's enough latitude. It's not like prescriptive, like you have to do this, it has to be this way, because that inherently, like you said, Hannah, makes it inflexible. And we know that GMs have to be flexible because players are the largest chaos agents that we deal with, right? It's the constant change. I feel like it's funny to me whenever I am comparing notes with another GM or DM or players, and we've played the same campaign, the same scenario, whatever it is, and like how different our experiences were. Like we befriended X NPC and they were great and they were so helpful. And then the other group's like, really, we hated that NPC and we kidnapped them and, sent them to the 9 hells. And it's just, it's funny to see the range of things that could happen. With all of that in mind, I would love to know from a good design perspective, both visually and words wise, what do you look for in pieces of design, specific stuff that people are writing for the stuff that you're publishing? How can you tell it's going to be good, or what parameters do you give your writers to make sure that they are hitting those points to make it easy to use, flexible, and also informative enough that it's useful for them?
Yeah, great question. 2 of the main things we talk about in our style guide are clarity and precision. So writing for role-playing games in general is a unique genre. It involves a mix of presenting evocative descriptions, the flavor, the imagination, the fantasy, alongside mechanical details, that technical manual part. Speaking of, not putting the onus on the GM, I have an example in the style guide about don't make the GM invent mechanics for your ideas. If you are saying there is a vast desert filled with various hazards, like ever-shifting dunes and sandstorms that strike with little warning, there doesn't need to be 300 words, but let's present some mechanics for that. Let's tell the GM, how do those ever-shifting dunes work? Where are you going to find the rules for this desert travel? Stuff like that. So clarity and precision. And concision is something that I really work with authors on and edit for and appreciate when an author already knows how to do, because again, sometimes we need to add those things. So we're not putting the onus on the GM to invent, but that means that saving the words for what matters is important. And especially when it comes to layout.
And Clara, from an art perspective, how do you make sure that the art is evocative and interesting and gives people more than just more questions that they have to answer themselves?
I think a lot of that comes from how we craft the art orders. So obviously the stage is set by the folks who write the work, but what we're then trying to craft with the art order is creating a setting, creating specificity, but also, and I know this is going to sound kind of counterintuitive, but specificity, but openness. So if there is this great desert that Hannah just mentioned, but there's also crystal dunes, erupting out of it, we want to specify, that's malachite that's coming out of it. We want to give a visual and a specificity that is going to, even though the GM might then change that to be, actually, that's garnet. There is a visual that they can give their player, whether it's through description that they're looking down real quick and be like, all right, let me look at this. And I don't have to think. My brain space is better spent on thinking about all of the mechanics that I already have going on. But that specificity of, what do we want this to be? Is it a multi-tier desert? Is there something floating? Are there sand dunes? Is this actually a rocky beach type desert? Is it not necessarily, when you say desert, what someone might think? Is it not just red dunes? Is it, gray and black sands of, something you might think along the coast of Iceland? Is there just giving that idea of very specific color and texture and elements of existing features that someone might be able to go like, oh, I can think of something similar to that in my head that sets the setting as this, something that I can resonate with and then build off of. So we, again, don't want to be prescriptive, but we want to be precise enough that someone has an idea of, instead of just, it's a desert with sand, giving them both a visual to then enough idea that they can like flow off of.
I think that's the counterintuitive thing that's happening there, at least the way I look at it, is that with being both concise and specific, it builds a framework that you can then work outside of. Because if I'm given no box at all, I'm not great. I really am, like, even from a design perspective.
You're going to end up with more questions.
Oh yeah,
and you can answer.
So many cursed hats. But like, if I don't have any constraints at all, even from like the design work I've done in the TTRPG space, it's tough. I have difficulty like really pinning down anything to work with. The second I'm given something to work off of, even if it is like reverse engineering from a piece of art or a specific mechanic or a setting, or like, then I'm like, okay, that's the little box you've given me. And then I kick down one of the sides and kind of run out. But at least I knew where I started. So something like, I know it feels counterintuitive as the DM who wants to write the backstory for the town and the elaborate details of the one bartender who used to be an adventurer.
But if you're writing you want to write the elaborate details for the bartender who used to be an adventurer and the patrons who come into the bar, then it's nice for you to have somebody else have done the work of, what does the town hall look like? What are the buildings here made out of? What do the people eat? Stuff like that.
Whether it's terrain, whether it's a rocky beach that they approach as they're coming over the crest of the cliff that may or may not exist. Like, we helped create that wide setting so you could give that slice of life that really lets you dig into what you're passionate about.
And just like we, the design, usually we're experimenting with some things, but the written design usually comes first, and then we hire artists and we sit down and look through our roster of artists and think about who would be a good fit for the kind of piece we want. Do they specialize in characters, in landscapes, in architecture, in magical effects? And also, like, do we think they'd be really excited and enjoy doing this particular piece? And with those art briefs, as Clara mentioned, we want to give those specific details, but not be prescriptive. We're not giving the artist the equivalent of, a full page of box text and saying, here is exactly what you must do, because we go to these artists because they are amazing creators and illustrators who bring their own ideas and often their own experiences playing TTRPGs and, telling fantasy stories. And their imagination contributes to it too.
Yeah, and very much in that line, and I think a lot of folks who might not do art themselves don't think about this, but like, a lot of artists are character artists, they're item artists, they're object artists. You wouldn't necessarily want to hire someone whose portfolio is just that and be like, hey, I want you to do the landscape. Like, you want to look for the artists that focus and love that type of work. So you look and hire accordingly to the type of work you're looking for that these people love to do.
Yep. I feel that way. I mean, interesting segue. I have quite a few tattoos, but it's the same concept of like, I'm not going to go ask the guy who only does tradition. It's mainly my legs. So we're just going to assume I'm telling the truth there. but the buddy of mine does traditional tattoos. Like, that's what he's always done. That is his thing. If I were to, I would just feel absurd to me to ask him to do a photorealistic tattoo on me.
Neither of you would be happy.
No, the concept alone scares my skin. But the same thing, but in the same way, finding the person that does a truly good photorealistic piece, why wouldn't I go to them for that? And so that's the other thing to think about at all times, is like looking for, and even when you're looking out as a DM, like finding the designer, the illustrator, the creator that does the thing that you know they do well and that you are looking for, and they are going to more specifically fill exactly what you're trying to find. Is it someone that is great at class design? And maybe their magic items aren't as good because they're so focused on making it work inside of that particular box of designing.
When it comes to Horizons, one of the things that we do is I do reach out to specific people whose, ideas and writing skills and design chops we think will be a great fit for the magazine. But usually I have them pitch 2 to 3 ideas and then select from among those to assemble a slate for each issue. So we're really bringing in the more than our imaginations. I don't usually go to somebody and say, hey, I want you to write a set of 7 Roman history inspired magic items, or, I want you to write a new swamp druid subclass. I want to know what they're passionate about creating, what their ideas are, and things that I would never have thought of. And then I might say, okay, you want to create this swamp druid subclass. Well, to kind of round that out as an article, let's include a few new spells or magic items to go with it.
And it gives us the opportunity to also, that painterly fantasy style is fantastic and very standard, and we love it, and I work in it, but we have the opportunity to look for artists that have a slightly more graphic style, look for artists that have something slightly outside of what you might see in the standard 5e. I mean, even Wizards is expanding the styles that you're seeing in the books these days, and we fortunately get to do the same.
Yes, that was one of the big takeaways I had from reviewing some of the stuff that you sent over from your second issue here, especially the cover image. Right, that's not something you'd ever expect to see in a Wizards book up to this point, anyway. It's so interesting and evocative. Just for the listeners, because this is a great thing for a podcast, is me explaining an image to you. But there's this broken mountain peak with just a gaping hole in the middle, and then there's this triangle and like a vortex inside, and there's adventurers just like looking at it, well, that's where we're going next. It's just it's so cool and interesting, and it's like a tropical, like almost like an atoll, like a beach setting. Just a lot of themes and stuff that you don't expect to see, but also you can pinpoint that and say, yeah, that's totally fantasy. That's totally D&D.
Yeah. And that's Kent. I was just say that's Kent Davis, who has done some beautiful pieces for Wizards. And we knew we wanted him to do a cover. Clara had this concept of this tropical beach with Portal, and we went to him and he said, oh, I've always wanted to do a tropical beach scene, to the point that it's become a joke among my friends. Thank you for giving me this dream prompt.
Yeah, making dreams come true.
When you connect with someone that you are looking to do work with, and they're like, you just brought me my dream project. Like, that just feels good.
Wish fulfillment. You're like, well, sure, I'm glad. Yeah. Also, so one of the other things that I think is amazing, Derek, what you could have done is just scroll over and wait until the alt text popped up. And you could have said that the cover of Horizons 2, a beautiful tropical shore with a white sand beach that gives way to a crystal blue ocean. In the shallows, a group of adventurers stands, observing 2 steep mountain peaks rising into the clouds in the distance, and a triangular portal with swirling dark energy between the peaks. So good. Also, further credit that is due, that is even, it is both accessible and just should be a bare minimum. There's an index that I could click on. Crazy. Whoa. Thank you. I mean, come on.
I mean, I go through these PDFs all the time to reference stuff, and I'm like, thank God we have bookmarks.
Yeah. Yeah. All the bookmarks and everything is there. It is one of the things that probably could infuriate me the most, the quickest, is when it's like a 300-page document and there's nothing. I'm like, you don't even have chapters for me.
The bare minimum we can do is accessibility.
Yeah.
That's one of my daily loves in my job, and one of the things I bring to this, from everything from alt text to bookmarks to anchor links and jumps and whatever we can do. Like, that's
the form fillable character sheets for Candela.
Oh boy, forms are my nemesis, but here we are.
Will it even read in the right order? because that's another thing that I dealt with in.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
It's a whole thing, but you do your best.
Yeah, when it reads across from column to column, it's a little confusing for the person who can't see well. Yeah, just wanted to shout that out because I observed it, and just, yeah, kudos to you for doing that extra due diligence, because again, it is one of the things that just, it helps everybody and helps specific people even more, but it is just a benefit to everyone. I don't have an easy segue out of that. So one of the other things, I know that the approach, it sounds like, is definitely the words and the art, but is there ever kind of like a little bit more of a play back and forth? Like once the art has been made, does does some of the text change based on that?
Usually, depending on the timing of the process, sometimes I will provide the editor with the art. Sometimes I'll show it to the author, but that's usually just for fun, so they can see the beautiful art being created for their article.
Oh, it's the highlight. It's the highlight. As someone who has seen words he has made into art, it's the highlight. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the best. So sometimes I will show it to the editor, right? Because one of our pet peeves is when text does not match the art. And throughout the entire art process, there's nothing more frustrating as a GM than to see this gorgeous piece of art, think that the room looks like this, and then you read the description and mechanics of this location and it doesn't match the art. And they're like, well, I can't show the art to my players. Not only am I confused, but I can't show this art to my players. So that's a, pet peeve of mine. And so sometimes I'll share the art with the editor so they can see, okay, this is what this character looks like. While you're editing the, description of this character, here's what the art is, so it doesn't change to become inconsistent, or maybe it changes to become even better. We are exploring some possibility of some artist-led work because, as mentioned, artists have great ideas and are often TTRPG DMs and creators and players. We did have, for one of our recent articles, Crimson Strings and Stolen Prayers, illustrated by Veronica O'Neill. Veronica happened to be in the right time zone for one of the playtests happening for that article, and I thought she might be interested, so I hooked her up with our lead tester, and she played in one of the tests for the article she was illustrating, and some of those experiences and events that happened in the test went into her art. So that was certainly a fun back and forth collaboration.
That art's really cool too, like the tendrils of blood from the fingers wrapping around other people. Oh man.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point. And if we haven't said it enough, one of the reasons we're having this conversation is that everything we're talking about applies to your home game. It's taking the approaches that you both are taking and applying them back. One of the things I've often thought of, and I've literally gone through the same thing of, I've come up with this, but I realized the piece of art that inspired the thing that I wrote no longer matches, and almost verbatim, I don't feel like showing the art anymore because I'm like, this is confusing. Now what I've created confusion for, like you said, for myself. I can't say these words and show this image and not expect some additional questions, or at least some sort of confusion, and like taking that second to either think, I mean, at that point, being inspired by a piece of art, like that art is going to speak on its own. So like my thing would be like, you know what, maybe I do need to go back and change the description of this room, because if you show art, players will look at art and they will be like, I saw this thing. What about the thing that I saw? And it's it's a weird walk back to be like, well, no, that's not really there.
But that thing's not actually, that one thing actually isn't there because it's, for my convenience, it wasn't. Like they resonate, they stick with it.
Yeah, I've definitely taken battle maps before, and popped them into Photoshop and spent way too many hours editing them, using the like smart auto select tool to highlight and change some colors and move some things around and customize it for the, big set piece battle that I want to run.
As far as like the principles you both have learned and lean on heavily with creating this product, yeah, what are some of the things you feel like directly translate to running home games for friends, for family, whatever it might be, and kind of maybe just, like a few tidbits of advice you've got? It could be from like a design perspective. It could be from, you were talking earlier, Hannah, about like having people ask you to, do everything and also pay you $12 an hour. Like, just having the right tools for the job is half the battle, and knowing who not to work with. But yeah, anything you've learned from like organization to writing to editing to knowing what to ask for the specific art you're looking for. I don't know. How does it, is there anything that you feel like applies?
I certainly think being a designer editor has given me a lot more confidence to adapt and to create my own stuff for players. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to create special stuff for my players. Sometimes if they're like, well, I want to use this ancestry, but it doesn't quite fit with the, setting we're playing in. And I'm like, hey, give me 15 minutes or, give me a day and I will change that up for you. And I'm going to actually sneak some lore secrets in there that they might not even know about till later in the campaign. Or lend me homebrew a magic item that I think will be perfect for you. But there is a difference between that and the professional publication, as we touched on earlier. I try not to put too much pressure on myself, and I try not to write my GM notes like I am writing a full-on adventure, because that is just really inefficient in terms of my time.
I think from my side, speaking from the player side or the GM side, and I might be a little biased, but there is no greater joy if you have the opportunity to commission an artist to make art of your character, your group, your setting, anything like that. And there's a range of artists out there, but truly having been on both sides of this, it is incredible. It is truly a joy to tell someone very specifically what your player looks like, what your group looks like, and to get them to do custom art for you. Like there is nothing greater that is also then supporting someone else who so loves this game and what you're doing. Outside of that, if you're looking to, wildly different in my suggestion, but if you're looking to build a website or build a community or anything like that, there is a great deep leveraging of pre-built stuff. Like if you go Patreon, if you go Discord, like anything that's pre-built and has all of those parameters already set there for you. There's a whole team of engineers and support, but you will have a lot more flexibility if you happen to need it for your product. If you build in your own space, if you happen to be able to hire someone to do it, or if you happen to have those skills yourself or you're interested and want to learn up, you just have a lot more flexibility in building on your own site. That's not just within a Kickstarter, a Patreon, or so on and so forth. So depending on what you're looking to stand up, just look at what your options are and know that more effort will probably come with bigger rewards.
Yeah, having had a couple custom pieces, even ones that I've done like for my own character, and like how cherished those end up being. And like, I feel like I learned that from someone who had started very early on. And so they have they have literally their first character. And he happened to know Todd Lockwood. So Todd did Lockwood. Which is that whole story about the meeting is very funny, because it was at an author's kind of thing. So then your brain's not automatically thinking Todd Lockwood. And then, so he was just chatting him up for probably 30, 40 minutes before he figured out who it was. But yeah, like seeing how cherished that piece was for him and understanding what it could then mean for me. And yeah, like I said, I have a couple pieces that, yeah, there was some of the most cherished stuff from games that I loved, that is easy to evoke those moments, evoke those feelings from those games, by having that piece of art.
Actually said an author thing. And my first thought with Todd Lockwood is has he finished that Fantasy Dragon series? And it doesn't look like it yet. So maybe someday.
One day. There's a lot of dragon art though. It's ready. It's ready to go right in there. Yeah. Don't know that we necessarily. So one of the things we do when we round it out, and I don't know that this topic will necessarily apply. I think we can think of a few things, but we often have air quote homework for the listeners to try and do of like what are things that we could think of, either media that they could consume. Oftentimes we'll think of shows, TV and stuff like that. I don't know that it necessarily applies to this topic. So one of the things I'll throw out is try and get into a playtest. Type in the word playtest and try and be involved in a playtest process. It is something that will benefit you immensely as a DM, even if you're a player in a playtest process. The amount that you will gain from that is huge. And maybe we could take a couple minutes to for both of you to speak on that. But that's the thing that really stood out to me as kind of the homework to tell our DM listeners, go just join.
I have learned so much from our professional playtesters as a DM and a designer. They've made me better at both because, they run a lot more games than I do. They run so many games and so many, games at different levels and different genres and different kinds of stuff. And, their job as testers is to look at things really critically and deliver really thoughtful, concise feedback that's not about how they would design it, but to identify the issue with it and the thing that is missing or confusing or seems incorrect or incongruous with the intention that's being presented. So, yeah, I've learned a lot from them. And certainly, join the Wild Mage Press Discord. We don't have a super formal process for bringing in playtesters at the moment, but there are and will continue to be opportunities for that. And I could talk for a whole hour about the playtest philosophy and how we're exploring what makes a good tester and what mindset to bring to a playtest. My playtesters could talk even more knowledgeably about that.
And I think to expand on that, not just playtesting, so maybe you don't have the opportunity, maybe you don't have the time, but look beyond the system you're most comfortable with. There is always something to be learned. There's always other designers out there. We all love tabletop. There's our best playtest runners know a lot of systems. Yes, maybe they're especially good at this one and that one, and we'll tap them for that. But much like reading, you do yourself nothing but benefit by being more aware of other systems out there. And there's so many great designers, and there's so many great systems that you can play with your friends or connect with online communities about. Do not be scared to look for additional systems. If nothing else, they deepen your love and appreciation for what you're already playing.
Yeah, these are the moments where I'm like, did we just become best friends? Because it is the thing I say most often. I'm like, just if nothing else, you learn what you don't like.
Yeah.
Even that's super beneficial. Even if that's the worst thing that happens.
Or it makes you appreciate something that much more by virtue of wait, look at that thing. I never really appreciated it until I played that game.
Regardless of what the internet is saying, I actually like this thing, and that's okay. Yeah. And even if, your home game group doesn't want to try new systems, like Clara saying, just read it. A lot of our testers run for different systems, but they also read them. And that's one of the things that we are excited about presenting in Horizons is different featured systems. And so the idea of go read our Candela Obscura article, even if you don't end up running Candela Obscura, take some ideas from it, whether that's the vibes or the mechanics or the art or the background questions or, the setting is super cool. And, we make our stuff really thoroughly play tested and crunchy, but with the thought in mind always that somebody can adapt this to use in a different system.
On that note, my homework is to do what Hannah was describing earlier and try to design your own stuff in whatever system it is. Give yourself a little challenge, even if it's not specifically for a player who's asking for something. Try to homebrew an item, a creature, a mechanic.
A cursed hat.
Homebrew a cursed hat and come tell us about your cursed hat.
Right. The worst thing that can happen is it doesn't work very well, and you just tell your players, I was just trying something. We're that's going to disappear. And the best thing that could happen is it works really well, and you have fun, and you keep trying it. So I feel like it's the gateway drug, just try to make a few things yourself if you haven't ever done that before, and see how fun it is.
Yeah, I love that.
Mine looks like a wizard hat, but it's actually a dark mantle. The other important question that we have is, where can people go on this World Wide Web to find all the stuff that you are both working on?
They can go to wildmagepress.com. Nice and simple. There are links to subscribe to Horizons on our website, links to our Patreon, our Discord, our shop. Wild Mage Press is on the social medias, primarily Blue Sky and Instagram these days. And I am Wild Rose Mage on those social medias. And I will let Clara give her own handle and information.
The Eldritch Blup. It's super professional.
Nice.
You can find me around.
Well, and what I can say is that I had a wonderful time, and I know that our listeners have definitely benefited from just us having a fun conversation with each other that we happened to record. And what I can also say is I think we've already staged ourselves to have a second episode with both of you on where we talk about playtesting, because I am super, super interested in it. And I think there will be just as much benefit to figure out kind of some quick ways that DMs can playtest their own work without potentially just showing too much of their hand to their players, because that is one of the toughest things. Is typically the person you want to talk to about the most is the people you can't talk to at all, because you're just like, hey, I had this really great idea for this, boss,
but I can't tell you.
I have a friend, and we both go through that. He's running a mini campaign right now in the Root RPG system. I think we're one session from the end, and we're both looking forward to him being able to talk about the planning that went into it.
Well, yeah. So like I said, we will definitely have to have both of you back on.
Well, this is going to be a fantastic intro and outro for you to edit.
I've started to leave a whole bunch more stuff in because I'm like, you know what, dear listeners, just here, have it. I'm not making bloopers. I'm just leaving them in. Like if they make sense, there's a few during the intros and outros of DMnastics. There's a strong chance that the listeners are hearing me say all of these things now. So we just want to thank Clara and Hannah for coming on, spending some time with us, and sharing some very insider baseball in hindsight about what it is like to be someone producing content in this TTRPG space. And again, as always, you are the creator at your table when you Dungeon Master. So any advice that they've given undoubtedly will help you.
Definitely, yes. As a person who has been DMing for a while and also has tried to publish some stuff, I think they gave a lot of good advice on both those fronts. And most DMs I know have also considered to themselves, hey, how hard is it to take what I have done for my home games and make something that other people could use too? So I think it's definitely applicable. If you enjoyed the show today, or if you have ever enjoyed any episode of Dungeon Master's Block or DMnastics ever, you should head on to iTunes, you should head on to Apple Podcasts, or Podchaser, or Good Pods, or any other pod aggregating site that you know of, and you should leave the Dungeon Master's Block a nice review, because you're a nice person, and nice people do that kind of thing.
Remember, the most fun term is podcatcher, because I always envision that it's a little man going around with like a big cheesy looking butterfly net catching my pods for me.
It's like the bug catchers from Pokemon, like the cute little kids who you destroy their hopes and dreams.
SpongeBob is the same thing as well, catching the jellyfish. The other thing I think is every time we do it this way, it sounds like if you can't leave a review on your podcatcher of choice, choose another. I know that's not the vibe we're going for, but it feels that way. But if you head over to a social media platform, we might be on it. If you look at Dungeon Master's Block or DMS_block, we should be there. And of course, as always, we're a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network, which is ever growing, where you can check out other shows like Bad Venture Club, Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters,
The Titans of Altera, Knocked Prone,
and more very soon.
Thank you for listening to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game. the only person capable of playing God,
killing characters,
and lowering the egos of all other people at the table. I'm DM Derrick, telling you to yes and.
I'm DM Neal. Good night and good luck. And keep on dungeon mastering.
It's not inspiration, it's not wisdom, and it's bad advice.
Anytime a player says that they think that they could do it better, just force them to do a Kickstarter. They'll stop.
Goodbye.